For 11 months, the Korean Mafia boss never said her name out loud, not once. But the night he walked into a private ballroom and saw Imara laughing with another man, he arrived 19 minutes early for the first time ever. And everyone noticed. Because men like Cheon Minjae don't lose control quietly, especially when the woman they've been secretly protecting is standing next to the one man they were supposed to keep away from her. Imara almost convinced herself it meant nothing. Almost. She was exceptionally good at her job. 2 years, coordinating private events for some of the most powerful and dangerous clients in New York City, had taught her how to read a room before the first guest even arrived. She knew who was lying. She knew who was nervous. She knew when someone was about to cause a problem, and she knew when a man was watching her. Cheon Minjae had been watching her for 11 months, not the way most men looked at women. There was no arrogance in it, no cheap hunger. He watched her the way someone watches a decision they've already made but haven't acted on yet, quietly, completely, like the looking itself was a form of control. Imara didn't know what to do with that. Minjae looked dangerous in the calmest possible way. Tall, lean. Black suit tailored too perfectly to be accidental. His collar stayed open just enough to reveal the edge of dark tattoos climbing his neck. Not decorative tattoos. History. The kind written in blood, loyalty, and things nobody survives unchanged. The first night she met him, he looked at her once, one slow glance, measured, intentional. Then he walked away to greet his guests like she hadn't affected the atmosphere around him at all. She told herself that was the end of it. It wasn't. His organization requested her firm again the next month. Then again. And again. By the 4th event, she stopped believing the assignment rotation was random. By the 14th, she knew it wasn't. Cheon Minjae never crossed a line, never flirted, never lingered. Everything he said to her stayed professional. But someone always left a coat on her chair when she stepped outside in the cold. Hallways somehow cleared seconds before she needed to walk through them. And no matter where she stood in a room, Minjae was always positioned between her and the nearest unchecked exit. Imara noticed all of it. She said nothing. By March, she stopped pretending she was imagining things. Then Dominic Reeves made her laugh. That was where everything cracked. A gallery event in Chelsea. Live jazz. Politicians pretending not to recognize criminals. Criminals pretending not to recognize politicians. Dominic leaned beside her during setup, looked at the ridiculous glass centerpiece hanging above the dance floor and muttered, "If that thing falls, at least the lawsuit will be memorable." The laugh escaped before she could stop it. Real. Unfiltered. And the second she looked up, she saw Cheon Minjae standing across the room. He wasn't supposed to be there yet. Not at that hour, not in that hall, but there he was, still, silent, watching. For the first time in 11 months, the expression on his face slipped. Just slightly. His eyes moved from Dominic to her, and stayed there. 2 seconds. That was all. Then he turned and walked away without saying a word. Imara stood frozen for a moment, her pulse suddenly uneven. And for the first time in 11 months, she asked herself a dangerous question. What if she stopped making this easy for him? What Cheon Minjae didn't know was that Imara had already been watching Dominic Reeves very carefully, not because she liked him, and not because she trusted him. Imara grew up learning how to read people from her mother, a federal investigator who could walk into a room and tell who was lying before anyone spoke. That instinct never left her. Dominic Reeves was hiding something. She was sure of it. What she didn't know yet was whether Dominic had been sent to watch Minjae, or whether someone had sent him to get close to her. And suddenly, after 11 months of silence, protection, and carefully controlled distance, every person in that room was playing a dangerous game without realizing the others already knew the rules. So before we continue, if you love slow burn mafia stories with dangerous tension, smart characters, and emotional twists that actually mean something, make sure you've liked the video and subscribed. Because what happened between Imara and Cheon Minjae after that night only gets more dangerous from here. Imara almost convinced herself the attention meant nothing. Almost. She had spent 2 years coordinating private events for Meridian Collective. High-security, high-stakes gatherings where the guest list never leaked and the clients rarely used real names. During that time, she developed a skill no training program could teach. She could read a room before the first guest arrived. She knew which client would cause problems before the appetizers touched the table. She knew which caterer was cutting corners. She knew when security was nervous before security knew it themselves. And she knew when a man was watching her. Not glancing. Watching. Cheon Minjae watched her the way someone watches a decision they've already made. Quietly. Completely. Like the attention itself carried intention. Imara didn't know what to do with that. The first time she saw him was 11 months earlier at a closed-door corporate dinner in Koreatown. The file had arrived with a single handwritten instruction from Meridian's founder, "You, no substitutes." Imara arrived 2 hours early, adjusting seating arrangements, checking timelines, fixing the lighting until the room felt expensive instead of cold. Then the elevator opened, and the atmosphere changed. 2 men stepped out first. Not obvious security, no earpieces, no stiff posture. They simply moved like the room already belonged to them. Then Minjae appeared behind them. Tall, lean, controlled. His black suit fit too perfectly to be accidental. Dark tattoos climbed above his collar, disappearing beneath expensive fabric. Not decorative tattoos. History. The kind written in violence, loyalty, and survival. His face was calm in a way that unsettled people. Not emotionless. Controlled, like something dangerous had learned patience. He looked at her once, one slow, deliberate glance. Not invasive, not careless, intentional. Then he walked past her and greeted his guests as if the room hadn't shifted around him. Imara went back to her clipboard and told herself firmly that was the end of it. It wasn't. Minjae requested Meridian Collective again the next month. Then again. And again. By the 4th event, Imara stopped believing the assignment rotation was random. By the 14th, she knew it wasn't. Cheon Minjae never crossed a line, never flirted, never lingered. Everything he said to her stayed professional. Push the second course by 15 minutes. Keep the east exit clear. The guest in blue has a shellfish allergy. Precise, controlled, efficient. But then there was everything he didn't say. The coat that appeared on her chair after she stepped outside during a January event. The crowded corridors that somehow cleared seconds before she needed to walk through them. The strange patterns she eventually noticed in every venue layout. No matter where she stood, Minjae always positioned himself between her and the nearest unchecked exit. Imara noticed all of it. She said nothing. By February, she stopped pretending the pattern was coincidence. By March, she started pretending it didn't matter. She built distance carefully, the way practical people do. No drama. No confrontation. She showed up, did her job, kept conversations short, and stopped allowing herself to look for him in crowded rooms. It almost worked. Then Dominic Reeves made her laugh. That was where everything cracked open. The event was hosted in a private Chelsea gallery filled with glass sculptures worth more than most apartments in Manhattan. Politicians pretending not to recognize criminals. Criminals pretending not to recognize politicians. Dominic leaned beside her during setup, glanced at the massive suspended centerpiece above the dance floor, and muttered, "If that thing falls, at least the lawsuit will be historic." The laugh escaped before she could stop it. Real. Unfiltered. And the second she looked up, she saw Cheon Minjae standing across the room. He wasn't supposed to be there yet. Not at that hour, not in that hall, but there he was, still, silent, watching. For the first time in 11 months, something shifted in his expression. Small, almost invisible. But there. His eyes moved from Dominic to her and stayed there. 2 seconds. Then he turned and walked away without a word. Imara stood frozen, her pulse suddenly uneven, and for the first time in 11 months, she asked herself a dangerous question. What if she stopped making this easy for him? The thought refused to leave. Imara was good at letting things go. She had built an entire life around emotional discipline. Her friends called her the stable one, which usually meant she was the person who learned to expect less, so disappointment hurt less. She knew how to bury thoughts before they became dangerous. This one rooted anyway. On the subway ride home from Chelsea, she stopped trying to ignore it and started examining it instead. 11 months, 14 events. One man who had never crossed a line, yet somehow never left her unprotected in any room they shared. For the first time, she allowed herself to look at the full pattern instead of isolated moments. January. The coat. She had stepped outside during a winter event to handle a vendor call. 11 minutes later, she returned freezing to find a charcoal wool coat folded neatly over her chair. Expensive. Heavy. Not hers. No one acknowledged it. She wore it anyway because it was 31 degrees outside and because somewhere deep down, she already knew who it belonged to. February. The Sutton Place corridor. The venue had a narrow hallway that became chaotic during service transitions. Twice that night, she needed to move through it quickly. Twice the crowd shifted before she arrived. No visible signal. No instructions. Just space opening for her like someone had already planned it. March. The Tribeca parking structure. One of the guests became difficult near the end of the evening, entitled, drunk, irritating in the specific way wealthy men often were. Imara handled it professionally, but 3 days later, replaying the night in her head, she realized 2 of Minjae's men had quietly repositioned during the interaction. Not randomly. Protectively. Like they had formed a perimeter around her without wanting her to notice. She sat with that realization for a long time, because one thing about Cheon Minjae had become painfully clear over 11 months. Nothing about him was accidental. Not his movements, not his silence, not the distance he maintained, and definitely not the protection, which meant the silence itself meant something too, and silence from a man like that was not the same thing as indifference. Imara had known it for months, she had simply refused to admit it. But now another question had started bothering her. Why her? The note on the original Meridian file still sat in the back of her mind. You. No substitutes. Written before he knew anything about her work, before he had any reason to request her specifically, which meant Minjae had chosen her the very first night, and she still didn't know why. That question stayed with her for days. Then Kezia texted her, "Hey, isn't this the consultant working your accounts right now?" Attached was a screenshot, a company registration, a flag shell corporation tied to a sole address, and one name, Dominic Reeves. Imara read it once. Then again, Dominic had worked Meridian events for 2 months, charming, easygoing, smart enough to make people underestimate him. But according to Kezia's findings, Dominic Reeves was connected to something much larger. A rival network, the kind that moved through legitimate businesses quietly while building influence underneath them. Imara grew up around investigations. Her mother spent years working federal cases involving organized crime and financial operations. Imara learned early how dangerous people hid behind respectable systems, and Dominic Reeves suddenly looked exactly like one of those people. She stood in her kitchen holding her phone, thinking carefully. Then the pattern clicked into place. The protection. The silence, the constant surveillance. Cheon Minjae hadn't been avoiding her because he didn't feel anything. He had been keeping distance because something dangerous was already moving around her, and Dominic Reeves might be part of it. Imara slowly set her phone down, then smiled slightly to herself, because if Dominic was watching Minjae through her, then she could watch Dominic through Minjae. And suddenly, after 11 months of silence, the game between them had finally started. The next event on Cheon Minjae's account was a private dinner at a members-only restaurant in the Flatiron district called Harrow. 12 guests. Intimate. In the way expensive restaurants are intimate, every detail mattered because there was nowhere for mistakes to hide. Imara knew the venue well. Dark wood paneling, amber lighting. A private dining room in the back that felt less like a restaurant and more like the inside of a negotiation nobody intended to lose. The kind of room where futures changed quietly. 3 days before the event, she called Dominic Reeves. She told him she needed support managing hospitality flow. That part was true. Harrow's staff was excellent but understaffed, and the evening required a level of precision that benefited from another experienced set of eyes. She could have called 4 other vendors. She called Dominic, and she knew exactly why. He arrived 40 minutes early carrying an equipment case and a coffee for her. Oat milk. No sugar. A detail she had mentioned once 6 weeks ago. Imara thanked him warmly while silently studying everything about him. How he moved through the venue, which exits he noticed first, whether he tracked Minjae's security placements, whether the easy charm he wore so naturally was real or trained. Her mother used to say the most dangerous people in any room were usually the easiest to underestimate. Imara remembered that while smiling at Dominic over her coffee. Then Cheon Minjae arrived 19 minutes early. She felt it before she saw him. The room shifted steadily around his presence. Conversations lowered. Staff straightened unconsciously. Awareness spread through the restaurant without anyone acknowledging it directly. In 14 events across 11 months, Minjae had never once arrived early. Not once. His timing was too precise to be habit. It was control. Tonight, that control had slipped by 19 minutes. Imara finished reviewing the seating chart before looking up. He was already watching her. Not scanning the room. Not checking exits. Watching her. His jaw looked tighter than usual. The stillness around him felt different tonight. Sharper. Less composed. "Mr. Cheon," she said evenly, "you're ahead of schedule. The room is ready." "I know it is." His voice stayed calm. But something underneath it wasn't. Then Dominic appeared from the east corridor. Perfect timing. Again. Imara was starting to think Dominic's timing was never accidental. "Need me to run the floor once before guests arrive?" he asked casually. "Please," Imara said. Then she added carefully, "You always know exactly where to be." "Honestly, I don't know how I manage these events without you." The shift in the room was immediate. Cheon Minjae went completely still, not his normal stillness. This was tension restrained so tightly it almost became visible. His eyes moved from Dominic to her, slowly. Imara held his gaze for 3 seconds, then looked away first. Safer that way, even now. The dinner unfolded with the same precision all Minjae's events carried. Courses arrived on time. Conversation stayed controlled. Problems disappeared before becoming visible. Imara moved through the evening smoothly, grateful for the familiarity of competence, while everything underneath the surface felt increasingly unstable. And all night, she watched Dominic. At 8014, he spent 4 minutes near the private service entrance, longer than necessary for any routine equipment check. At 8031, he exchanged a brief glance with a guest in a gray jacket at the far end of the table. Less than 2 seconds. Easy to miss, impossible to ignore when she noticed it. Imara logged both details silently. At 9:47, one of Minjae's inner circle appeared beside her near the kitchen corridor. Quiet, broad-shouldered, unshakably calm. A man she privately called Anchor. He didn't hand her a message. He simply said, "He's asking for you." The private room at Harrow was small. One lamp cast amber light across dark floorboards. Outside, the city hummed faintly beneath the windows. Cheon Minjae stood near the glass with his jacket removed, his posture carrying the controlled stillness of someone refusing to show he had been waiting. Without the jacket, more of his tattoos were visible. Dark ink layered across pale skin and intricate lines that looked earned rather than designed. Imara had seen glimpses before. This felt different, more personal. She stepped inside. The door closed behind her. Minjae waited before speaking. By now she understood his silence wasn't hesitation. It was calculation. "Dominic Reeves," he said finally. "How long have you been working with him?" Imara studied him carefully. She expected caution. Deflection. Instead, he went directly to the center of it. 2 months, she answered. Then she asked, "How long have you known who he works for?" The silence that followed carried weight. Minjae turned from the window slowly. Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise. Recalculation. 6 weeks, he said. Then we've both been watching him longer than we've been watching each other. She held his gaze steadily. Actually, that's not true. He said nothing, which answered the question anyway. Somewhere between Anchor finding her in the hallway and this room, Imara decided she was done pretending she didn't understand what had been happening for 11 months. Your men clear corridors before I reach them, she said quietly. Someone left me a code in January after I spent 11 minutes outside in freezing weather. You kept me assigned to your accounts for almost a year. She tilted her head slightly. I'm not on your payroll, Mr. Cheon. So tell me exactly what I am. Minjae looked at her for a long moment. Outside, traffic moved endlessly through Manhattan. Inside, the room felt perfectly still. Someone I wanted close, he said. Without making you a target for it, the honesty of it landed harder than she expected. You rejected the Choi Alliance last spring, she said. Not a question. Kazia's research had helped her piece it together over weeks. Financial shifts, missing partnerships, quiet retaliation patterns. Minjae's eyes sharpened slightly. Yes, and Dominic Reeves works for them. Yes, he's been using my event access to study your operations, guest lists, security movement, venue layouts. She paused. I know. His attention sharpened completely now. I've been letting him think I didn't. For the first time since entering the room, something in Cheon Minjae changed visibly. Not shock, recognition. As if he had finally realized the person sitting across from him had been playing the same game all along. You were running a counter-operation, he said quietly. I was protecting my access to information. A slight shift touched the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, close enough to matter. Then he said her name. Imara. Not professionally, not carefully. Like a decision he had finally stopped resisting. She felt it immediately. Don't, she said softly. Don't reduce this moment by pretending it's smaller than it is. His eyes held hers. No distance left in them now. I rejected the Choi Alliance, he said, because it required me to cut ties I wasn't willing to lose. A pause. Then, including the possibility of you. Imara had spent 11 months waiting for something between them to break open. This wasn't a crack. It was a door finally unlocking. She set her clipboard down slowly. Tell me everything about Dominic Reeves, she said. Tonight? Tonight. Minjae steadied her for another second. Then he pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. The gesture was so unexpectedly normal that it dismantled the last of the emotional distance she had carefully maintained around him. Imara sat across from him, and for the first time in 11 months, they stopped pretending they were on opposite sides of the room. What they built in that room over the next 2 hours was not a plan. Plans required time. What they built was faster than that. Sharper. A shared understanding assembled from 2 separate investigations that had been tracking the same threat from opposite directions. Cheon Minjae explained everything with the precision of someone used to turning dangerous information into clean facts. Dominic Reeves had been embedded inside Meridian Collective's vendor network for 7 months. 2 months longer than Imara realized. His placement wasn't random. The Choi faction identified her as the consistent coordinator on Minjae's accounts months earlier and inserted Dominic specifically to get close to her. The shell company Kezia uncovered was only one layer. There were 3 more operating through event management firms in different cities, all feeding information into the same structure. He wasn't building toward one event, Minjae said. He was building a complete operational map. Every event you coordinated for me became part of a larger file. Imara thought about the 4 minutes Dominic spent near the service entrance at Harrow. The eye contact with the man in the gray jacket. He made a handoff tonight, she said. Minjae met her gaze steadily. Yes. She absorbed that calmly. What does the Choi faction actually want? What they've wanted since April, he said. To weaken my infrastructure enough that the families under my protection start looking elsewhere. They don't need to destroy me. They only need to make me appear vulnerable. and my event access gives them security layouts, guest patterns, timing, among other things. Imara leaned back slightly, thinking, then I can give Dominic one more handoff. Minjae's attention sharpened. A controlled one, she continued. I decide what he sees at the next event, which means I decide what the Choi faction receives. The room fell quiet. You understand what you're suggesting, he said, not a warning, a confirmation. I understand perfectly. Minjae studied her for a long moment. Something about him had changed over the course of the evening. The controlled distance was still there. It would probably always exist in some form. But now there was something else beneath it. Trust. There's one more thing, he said. She waited. The bodyguards. The corridors. Anger. The fact that he used the nickname told her immediately that his people talked about her more than she realized. They'd been assigned to you since month 4, he said. That was when I confirmed the Choi faction had started monitoring my account activity. Imara held that quietly. Month 4, she repeated. Before Dominic. Before I could confirm Dominic, Minjae corrected. I suspected earlier. So you've been protecting me from a threat I didn't know existed. Yes, while also being the reason the threat existed. He didn't look away. Yes. The honesty of it settled heavily between them. Imara thought about 11 months of careful positioning. The coats, the corridors, the content invisible protection she mistook for quiet attention without realizing it was also strategy. He had been balancing both the entire time, wanting her close enough to protect, keeping her distant enough to survive it. And suddenly she understood something else too, how lonely that must have been. You could have told me, she said softly. You would have left the account. She opened her mouth to deny it, then stopped. Because he was right. Minjae saw the realization immediately. I know, he said quietly. The silence between them changed after that. Not awkward. Not uncertain, just honest. Finally. The next event, Imara said. I'll need 3 weeks to build a believable handoff. Dominic can't suspect anything. Minjae nodded once. Then she added, and the next time there's danger around me, you tell me before it happens, not afterward. His eyes held hers steadily. Yes, one word, simple. But she heard the cost of it. For a man like Cheon Minjae, giving up control was not natural. Trusting someone inside his operations, inside his vulnerabilities, inside the dangerous architecture of his life, that cost him something real. And he was doing it anyway. Imara noticed that. She simply didn't say it out loud. Instead, they returned to operational details, timelines, guest movements, contact points, security flow. And somewhere between strategy discussions and quiet eye contact across amber light, the wall Imara had spent months building around herself finally collapsed. Not dramatically. Inevitably. 3 weeks. That was how long it took to build the trap. Imara approached it with the focused precision of someone finally realizing how capable she actually was. She mapped every access point Dominic had used over 7 months. Every habit, every blind spot, every assumption he relied on. Then she built a false security framework, convincing enough to survive scrutiny, while quietly directing the Choi faction exactly where Minjae wanted them looking. Dominic never realized the information he carried was designed to lead them into the wrong door. The event itself was small, a private gathering at a members-only club in Murray Hill. 20 guests. Low profile compared to Minjae's usual operations. Dominic behaved exactly as expected. Relaxed, professional, useful. At 8:52, he made the handoff. Imara watched the entire thing from the service corridor without being noticed. And afterward, standing there with her clipboard against her chest, she realized something important. Her mother had never simply taught her how to observe people. She taught her how systems worked, how power moved, how dangerous people hid themselves inside ordinary structures. You don't fight systems from outside them. You learn them, you move inside them, and when the moment comes, you are already standing exactly where you need to be. Dominic Reeves was quietly removed from 3 active hospitality accounts the following week over contract irregularities Meridian Collective's legal team had supposedly been investigating for months. The paperwork was clean, precise, impossible to challenge. 2 weeks later, he was escorted out of a private midtown dinner by men who never introduced themselves. He disappeared after that. No new contracts, no hospitality work, no trace through the networks Imara could access. She never asked Minjae what happened next. By then, she understood where the edges of her knowledge were supposed to stop, and more importantly, which boundaries she was willing to cross anyway. 3 days after Dominic disappeared, Imara sat at her desk reviewing contracts when her phone lit up with an unknown number. She knew exactly who it was before answering. "Dinner," Cheon Minjae said. No greeting, no build-up, just the word itself. Direct. Certain. Slightly unfamiliar in his voice, like he was still adjusting to the reality of finally allowing himself to want something openly. Imara leaned back in her chair slowly. "Somewhere that has nothing to do with an event you hired me for?" A short silence. "Yes. Is that your version of asking me out?" Another pause. Shorter this time. "Yes." Imara looked out the office window at the gray Manhattan sky between buildings. Ordinary, quiet, real, and somehow she preferred that far more than anything cinematic. "Then that's my version of saying yes," she said. She ended the call and sat there for a moment, her phone still in her hand, something warm and dangerous moving through her chest. Then she calmly returned to reviewing contracts, even though absolutely nothing about her life felt calm anymore. The restaurant he chose was in the West Village, not connected to his professional life in any visible way. Imara understood immediately that this was intentional, a small Italian restaurant hidden off Blacker Street, no sign outside. Just a number on the door and warm light glowing through frosted glass, the kind of place built for people who already knew where they were going. Cheon Minjae was there before her. Corner table. Back to the wall. Clear view of the entrance and service corridor. She noticed automatically because 11 months of watching him had trained her to notice everything about how he moved through space. Then he stood when she approached the table. The gesture caught her off guard. It was so ordinary, so unexpectedly human. She had prepared herself for the version of him she knew from operational settings. Controlled, unreadable, deliberate. She had not prepared herself for a man who stood up when she walked into a room. Something inside her shifted slightly. They ordered dinner. And talked. It wasn't effortless. Neither of them worked that way. There were moments where silence lingered a little too long, and moments where professional habits surfaced before being carefully set aside again. But it was real. That surprised her most. How real it felt sitting across from him in ordinary light without security briefings, event schedules, or carefully managed distance standing between them. Minjae told her things. Not everything, but enough. He told her about arriving in New York at 19 with his older brother and learning very quickly that the city only respected power once power became impossible to ignore. He spoke about the choices that shaped his life, now without apology and without pretending those choices were clean. He told her the people under his protection stayed loyal because he had always been loyal first, without exception, even when loyalty cost him more. And he told her the violence connected to his world was real, not glorified, not denied, simply acknowledged. Imara listened carefully, asked questions when she had them, and never looked away from the difficult parts. She could actually see him adjusting to that in real time, as if he had spent so long expecting people to retreat once they understood him that her continued presence required recalculating everything. "You're not afraid," he said eventually. "Not admiration. Observation." "I didn't say that," Imara replied calmly. "I'm listening. Those aren't the same thing." He considered that slowly, then nodded once. "Why did you keep requesting me?" she asked. "You could have replaced me at any point." Minjae was quiet for a moment, then he turned his wineglass once against the tablecloth. A small, unconscious movement she had never seen during any professional event, something unguarded. "Because you're the only person in those rooms," he said quietly, "who treats everyone in them like they matter equally." His eyes stayed on hers. You move through a space like every person inside it deserves dignity. Not just the powerful ones. A brief pause. I found that difficult to stop noticing. The words settled into her slowly. It wasn't romantic in any conventional way, which somehow made it feel more intimate, because it sounded exactly like him, specific, honest, carefully observed, and suddenly she understood something important. Cheon Minjae loved through attention, through consistency, through noticing everything and quietly choosing what mattered enough to protect. The realization stayed with her for the rest of the night. They left the restaurant around 10:30. He walked her toward the waiting car outside, which she realized he had arranged the moment the driver greeted her by name. She looked sideways at him. Minjae said nothing, which answered the question anyway. At the curb beneath the yellow streetlights, Imara stopped walking. "The coat," she said, "in January." He looked at her steadily. "That was you, not a question." She already knew. "You were outside for 11 minutes, he said quietly. It was 31 degrees. Her breath caught slightly. "You knew exactly how long I'd been out there." "Yes." Imara shook her head slowly, overwhelmed by the realization that someone had been caring for her this carefully for nearly a year while asking for absolutely nothing in return. "Cheon Minjae," she said softly. "You could have just told me, I know." The answer came quieter this time, more vulnerable. She looked at him standing there beneath the city lights. The tattoos at his collar, the stillness that no longer felt cold to her, it felt controlled, protective, tired, human, and suddenly she realized how exhausted she was pretending distance still mattered. So she reached for his hand. Not dramatically, just her fingertips brushing lightly against the back of his hand. A question instead of a declaration. Minjae went completely still, then his hand turned beneath hers, and his fingers closed around her hand carefully, fully, like a decision he had been holding back for 11 months had finally reached the point where it could exist openly. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "This is going to be complicated," she said quietly. "Yes. I'm not asking you to pretend otherwise. I know." She looked up at him directly. "But I am asking you not to protect me by shutting me out anymore." His eyes held hers steadily. "If something involves me, I want to know." The silence that followed felt important. "Then I believe you." 3 simple words. But she understood what they cost him. For a man like Cheon Minjae, trust was not natural. It was earned slowly and given carefully, and now he was giving it to her anyway. That mattered, more than he probably realized. 4 months passed. They were not easy months. Nothing real ever is. There were weeks when Minjae disappeared emotionally into parts of his world. Imara still only understood in fragments. Weeks where he sat beside her physically while carrying the weight of things he couldn't fully explain. Imara never pretended that was easy for her. When he returned from those distant places mentally, she told him honestly what the distance felt like, and he listened. Never defensive, never defensive. Then he would become fully present again in a way that made ordinary attention feel insignificant by comparison. She hadn't expected that from him. Truthfully, she realized she had underestimated him more than once. Anger eventually introduced himself properly, Junseo. 6 weeks into their relationship, he gave her a single nod of professional approval while she entered Minjae's building one evening. It was the most expressive she had ever seen him. Imara kept a straight face until the elevator doors closed. Then she smiled privately to herself for exactly 3 seconds before regaining composure. Some moments belonged only to her. In the 4th month, she left Meridian Collective. Not because of Minjae. That distinction mattered to her enough that she examined it carefully before making the decision. She left because she realized she had spent years minimizing what she was actually capable of. Her firm offered her a lateral restructuring that would have kept her coordinating the same level of luxury events indefinitely. For the first time, that future felt too small. So she accepted a position consulting on intelligence-adjacent security operations for several cultural institutions. Harder work. Less money initially, but work that actually used the instincts and intelligence she had spent years disguising as good coordination. She told Minjae over dinner. He listened carefully. then asked only one question. Is it what you want? Yes, he nodded once. That was it. No control, no pressure, no attempt to shape the decision around himself, just respect. Clean and complete. Imara filed that away carefully because moments like that revealed who people really were. The public version of Cheon Minjae wasn't false. He was powerful, controlled, dangerous when necessary. But the private version of him was different. Quieter, more precise, the man who stood when she entered rooms, the man who left coats behind without asking for credit, the man who remembered things nobody else noticed. That version felt far more dangerous to her than the reputation ever had, because that version was the one she could actually fall in love with, and maybe already had. One evening in late autumn, she sat on the couch in his apartment reviewing documents, while the city glowed beyond the massive south-facing windows. Minjae sat across the room working silently at his desk. The quiet between them felt earned now, comfortable, alive. Imara looked up from her brief and watched him without meaning to. The line of his shoulders, the stillness that no longer felt intimidating. She understood now that silence was simply his first language, and she had learned how to hear it. She thought about the woman she had been 11 months earlier in that Chelsea gallery, pretending not to feel the weight of his attention from across the room. That version of herself had been careful, contained, lonely in a way she never fully admitted. She didn't think that woman was weak, just afraid, and she wasn't afraid anymore. Minjae looked up suddenly and caught her watching him. What? Flat voice. Completely unconvincing eyes. Imara smiled slightly. Nothing. And for once she meant it completely. Something softened at the edges of his expression, barely visible, but real. Then he looked back down at his work. His hand shifted slightly against the edge of the desk, toward her. Tiny movement, almost invisible. But after 11 months of learning the private language of a man who said everything important without words, Imara understood exactly what it meant, and outside the windows, New York continued moving endlessly around them. There was one question Imara carried for months without ever saying out loud. Not about Cheon Minjae, not about the Choi faction, not about the George architecture of the world she stepped into. The question was about herself. What kind of woman chooses this? She examined it carefully over time because she was the kind of person who examined difficult things instead of hiding from them. Eventually, she realized the question itself was wrong. It assumed choosing something difficult required justification. It assumed love needed to earn its place against safety or simplicity, and Imara no longer believed that. The only question that mattered was simpler than that. Do you understand what you're choosing, and do you choose it anyway? She understood, and she chose him anyway. That was enough. The new work she moved into after leaving Meridian Collective became exactly what she hoped it would become. Harder, smarter, more meaningful. She built an intelligence-adjacent security framework for cultural institutions that made powerful people feel protected without making them feel controlled. That mattered to her. It was the most specific compliment she knew how to value. In November, her mother visited her new office. She looked around slowly before settling her eyes on Imara. "You look different," she said. "I'm finally building something real," Imara answered. Her mother nodded once in quiet understanding. They spoke about other things after that. Imara didn't introduce her to Cheon Minjae yet. Some things had their own timing. And she had learned the value of timing. In December, something happened inside Minjae's world. She never received the full details, only fragments. Enough to understand it was serious. He disappeared for 4 days. No calls. No updates. Nothing. Imara sat alone in her apartment with the city outside her windows and finally understood what it meant to care about someone whose safety she could never completely control. She didn't pretend calmness she didn't feel. She let herself be afraid. When Minjae returned, he told her what he could, which was already more honesty than he used to give anyone. She listened carefully, asked only the questions that mattered, ignored the ones that would cost him too much to answer. Later that night, standing in his apartment while the city lights stretched endlessly beyond the windows, she looked at him quietly. "You came back. Minjae held her gaze. I told you I would. I know, she said softly. I just needed to say it. The room fell quiet. Then, I'm going to keep coming back. The words settled somewhere deep inside her. Okay, she said. And this time she understood exactly how much that word meant. Building something real with someone like Cheon Minjae required a specific kind of courage. Not dramatic courage. Not cinematic courage. Quieter than that. Harder than that. Harder than that. The courage of choosing someone repeatedly without guarantees because the alternative, distance, control, emotional isolation, had stopped feeling like protection a long time ago. Sometimes she still thought about the subway ride months earlier, the list she made in her head, the coat, the corridors, the way he always positioned himself between her and danger before she even realized danger existed. She thought about the woman she used to be, careful, controlled, lonely in ways she disguised as independence. She almost stayed that version of herself forever. Almost. One evening near the end of winter, Imara sat across Minjae's couch with her legs resting over his lap while he absently traced slow circles against her ankle. No tension, no distance, just comfort. The kind earned over time instead of performed. Outside, New York moved endlessly through another ordinary night. The Choi situation will be resolved by spring, Minjae said quietly. I know. After that? He paused slightly. Things will become quieter. Imara looked at him carefully, the sharp line of his face, the stillness she had spent more than a year learning how to read. She suspected she would spend years learning the rest of him. And strangely, the thought no longer frightened her. Quieter doesn't mean simple, she said. No. I'm not asking for simple. Minjae turned toward her fully then. His eyes held hers the same way they always had. Back in ballrooms, across crowded rooms, through 11 months of silence, like once he focused on her, the rest of the world temporarily stopped existing. What are you asking for? He asked quietly. Imara thought carefully before answering, the way she always did with things that mattered. For you to keep choosing this, she said finally, the same way I'm going to keep choosing it. No guarantees, no promises about easy endings, just choice. Again and again. Minjae held her gaze for another long second. Then his hand pressed lightly against her ankle. Small movement. Quiet gesture. But by now she understood his language perfectly. She leaned back against the couch and looked out toward the city again. New York remained exactly what it had always been. Loud. Indifferent. Alive. The same city that watched her walk into rooms and read people before they spoke. The same city that watched her build walls around herself so carefully she almost mistook them for strength. The same city that watched her finally reach across a street corner and touch the hand of a man who had been silently choosing her long before she realized she wanted to choose him back. And somehow the city kept moving like none of it mattered. Imara found herself loving it for that. The way life continued quietly while the most important things happened inside it. Minjae's hand rested warm against her ankle. The open brief sat forgotten in her lap. The apartment was silent in the kind of way that made silence feel full instead of empty. And for the first time, in a very long time, everything felt exactly the way it was supposed to. Hey, if you made it this far, then you already know this story was different. Imara didn't wait to be rescued. She didn't fall apart the second things became dangerous. She walked into a complicated world with her eyes open, built her own strategy inside it, and still managed to make a man who controls entire rooms completely lose composure over one laugh. That's the kind of woman you remember. And Cheon Minjae? 11 months of silence, coats left on chairs, corridors cleared before she even reached them. That man was never indifferent. He was terrified that loving her openly would place a target on her back. And the moment he realized distance was hurting her anyway, he chose her openly, every single time after that. So if this story pulled you in, if you felt the tension, the quiet moments, the way these two understood each other without needing everything explained out loud, then this channel was made for you. Hit the like button so I know you want more stories like this. And if you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe and join us. Because around here, we don't do weak characters or empty drama, we do intelligent women, dangerous men, psychological tension, slow burn obsession, and stories that actually stay with you after they end. Now, before you leave, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Seriously, I love seeing how far these stories travel. Whether you're watching from Lagos, London, Atlanta, Toronto, Johannesburg, Manila, or somewhere completely unexpected, let me know. And one last thing. Cheon Minjae spent 11 months protecting Imara from a distance because he believed loving her openly would make her a target. But what if silence was never the safest choice? What if finally admitting he loved her was the most dangerous thing he ever did, because the Choi faction wasn't finished? And now they knew exactly who he would burn the world down to protect. Think about that. Hey, if you made it this far, then you already know this story hit differently. Imara didn't wait to be rescued. She didn't fall apart the moment things became dangerous. She stepped into a world most people would run from, played the game intelligently, and still managed to make a man who controls entire rooms completely lose composure over one laugh. That's the kind of woman you remember. And Cheon Minjae? 11 months of silence. Coats left on chairs, hallways cleared before she even reached them. That man was never indifferent. He was terrified of what loving her openly would cost her. And the moment he realized distance was hurting her anyway, he chose her. Completely. Every single time after that. So if you felt something watching this story, if you caught yourself holding your breath during those quiet moments between them, then this channel was made for you. Go ahead and like the video, subscribe, and join us here because we tell stories where the tension actually matters, the characters are intelligent, and nothing comes easy. And before you leave, tell me where you're watching from in the comments. I genuinely love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, one last thing. Cheon Minjae spent 11 months believing silence was the safest way to protect her. But what if finally admitting he loved her was the most dangerous thing he ever did? Because now the people watching him know exactly who he would destroy the world to protect. And that changes everything. I'll see you in the next story.